Welcome to In Season Nevada. This is going to be part one of accurizing a hunting rifle, starting with proper scope mounting. So in this video, I'm going to teach you guys how to straighten scope bases and how to properly affix a scope onto a rifle. All tools will be listed in the description below. Right here, we're just simply making sure that these rings hold the scope at the proper height before going forward with the work that is required in order to properly attach this scope. Now, they do make self-straightening scope rings at this point. However, those were not available for this particular rifle. Typically, you want to find the proper bases to your rifle, then the proper scope rings to your bases, then the proper scope that matches your scope rings, because scopes are fairly compatible since there's only 1 inch and 30 millimeter diameter scope rings, which gives you a wide variety of options on the market for picking the correct scope for your rings. Unfortunately, I had to retrofit this, so I had to find rings that matched my scope and my bases that were already on this rifle, since this rifle had worn out scope rings that needed to be replaced. So this next step here is what is called straightening, and this is what you have to do with traditional style scope rings, because if you do not do this step, there is additional material that will pinch on your scope and it will cause accuracy issues, and it can even damage your scope. So you do not want to affix any scope to a set of rings without straightening them, unless, again, they have that self-straightening technology. Keep in mind, I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, but once you straighten a pair of scope rings, those scope rings are married to that rifle. They cannot be used for any other rifle, but you can put any scope that would fit those those rings within that scope. So straightening your scope rings only makes those scope rings compatible to that rifle. It does not interfere with adding any other scopes if you ever want to replace your scope in the future. So don't think that the scope is married to the rifle. Just consider the fact that the bases and the rings are now straightened to the rifle. What we're doing is we're adding 220 grit compound that came inside of my scope ring straightening kit that I will link in the description. Do not think that you have to buy the kit that I have, or that the kit that I have is even available. I'm just giving you an idea of what you could purchase. Feel free to do your own shopping. This is not a sales channel. This is merely an informational channel, and I want to make things convenient for you and give you guys ideas on what you could buy. We do make a small commission if you do decide to make a purchase on Amazon. Links in the description below. So what we're doing is applying compound to the front of the rear and the back of the forward scope ring, and we're applying just a little bit of compound at a time and just going back and forth with that grinder bar. There's no tension at this point, so no grinding is happening at this particular period of time, so you don't have to worry about removing too much material. While I finish applying the grinder compound, I do want to mention that there are 4 key components to accurate hunting rifles. That is sight stabilization, firearm rigidity, ammo selection, and shooter fundamentals. With these 4 checkpoints matched, you should be able to have an extremely accurate rifle. If any one of these components is missing, your hunting rifle will not be accurate. So what we're doing now is we're simply tightening the scope rings to the scope ring tops to the actual bottoms of the scope rings to make sure that we are starting to make contact with the grinder bar. We are actually starting to remove material at this point, and as you can see, my hand moves slower and slower as the force that is required to move this bar goes up. And if you can't tell, I'm putting a lot of force on this bar, and then as it grinds away material, it's easier and easier, and my hand can move faster and faster. So that's just showing you that material is grinding away. Now, I've done this a lot with a few different rifles, and so I kind of know about how much material I need to remove. You may have to try this process multiple times. For me, it seems like 2 rounds of each scope ring going through this process seems to work for me with my level of force that I apply to the rifle. I know this video is a little bit slow, but I want to show you in real time that this is not something that takes an incredible amount of time to do. You could easily get this done in an evening after work. It really does not take an entire day in order to set up a scope properly on a hunting rifle. The main thing is, if you don't have the right tools, this is literally impossible to do. Later on in the series, I do actually want to show you guys the shooting results of all of this work that we are doing to this rifle. We're actually going to be developing some hand loads and attempting to accurize some loads to this particular rifle. But if I can get my hands on some other 270 ammo, I'll also show you an example of if you use multiple different brands of ammo through the same rifle, once in a while you will find a rifle that is ammo picky and it will not like a particular brand of ammo for whatever reason. I don't know the reason on that, but some rifles do tend to be more ammo picky than others, and you can accidentally come across a brand of ammo that just will not work well in your particular rifle. So as you can see, I showed the camera me removing each of the rings there and showing that some of the material was removed. Now all I'm doing is using my handy dandy rag, which is the shirt that I'm wearing, to remove the excess compound from the scope ring. I'll try to do a better job of explaining the material removal on this second scope ring here. So as you can see, there's a little bit of grinding compound still on there. I'm going to remove that grinding compound. So hopefully the camera can see this one a little bit better. And it's hard for the camera to pick it up, but what you want to see is roughly about 50 to 80% of the original material on the surface area of the scope to have been scratched and removed. Once about 50% of the surface area is scratched, then you know that the scope rings are going to have way better contact with your scope. And you don't have to have 100% straightening on your rings in order for it to be good. 50 to 80% seems to be just enough to where you're not removing so much material where your scope rings are loose, but you're also getting great contact and avoiding damage to your scope. So that's kind of the amount of material that I look for that has been scratched. You don't need 100% because that would take quite a while. If you don't get to that 50 to 80% mark within the first couple of passes with the bar, go ahead and repeat this process as many times as you need in order to hit those numbers. Now what we're doing is we are attaching the scope. The first step is to make sure that the gun is level. As you can see, I take quite a bit of time in order to properly level the gun, because there's no point in leveling the scope if the gun isn't level. So we are leveling it both left and right and front and back to make sure that there are no reasons why we could get a misreading on this gun. Okay, in this next step, we're going to make sure that the scope is level before we adjust our eye relief. Now this isn't going to be the final level position, but because the rifle is level, and if we make the scope level, it's going to allow our eye to more properly calibrate to a comfortable shooting position. If we can't the scope, then what we're going to be doing is we're going to be unconsciously correcting ourselves in order to make the scope look level in our eye. And then that's going to cause us to be in positions that are not necessarily the most comfortable for a level scope. I don't know how else to explain it other than just have the end in mind. At the end of the day, you're going to be shooting in multiple different positions. You're going to be in the prone position, the sitting position, the kneeling position, the standing position, in different circumstances when you're hunting. And so you want to find what I like to call the center of comfort. So what that means is moving your hand and your face forward onto the rifle until it becomes uncomfortable, then backward onto the rifle until it becomes uncomfortable, and moving that scope position to make sure that it allows for the maximum amount of correct eye relief within the scope, within your natural shooting positions. Now, I am going to be the one shooting this rifle, so I am using myself in order to set the scope. If you are setting this rifle up for somebody else, make sure that they are present in this moment, because what you do not want to do is you do not want to find out at the range that this gun does not fit them. Okay, and this is quite a bit of work that's going to be in front of us, and you're going to need a vise typically in order to do this properly. So make sure that it's done correctly right now, especially if you plan on adding Loctite in order to keep your scope rings tight for a long period of time, especially when you're traveling through bumpy roads. It's not uncommon for your scope to get loose over time if you do not use Loctite. So just make sure that you understand that you want to set this up correctly now. So what I am doing now is I am tightening the screws left and right, and what this will do is it'll keep that bubble in the center. If you see the bubble starting to drift to one side, simply move sides to the opposite side and start screwing into the opposite side until you get a click at 15 pounds, and then just keep alternating sides from then on out. Now, it shouldn't be that hard to maintain the level once you have two screws that are clicked in at 15 inch-pounds of torque, but don't just do this willy-nilly. Make sure you keep an eye on that level, because again, you don't want to have to redo this entire process by bumping the scope off course, and then needing to reset your eye relief and resetting your level. So this is a great opportunity to talk about my vise setup. I've got a vise, obviously, with a pair of plastic soft jaws, and then I use a random piece of deer hide that I've tanned and was left over from a project in order to hold the gun steady. So no need to buy a towel or any leather from the store. For a good old redneck like me, anything lying around the house will do. Make sure you shoulder your rifle before you move on to your bore sighting step, because if any adjustments need to be made to your scope, you want to do them now. Like I said, make sure that your scope leveling and your eye relief are set correctly before you move on to any of the next steps. So there's three ways to bore sight. You can either remove the bolt and look at an object that is far away through the bore, and then use your sights to align themselves with the target. You can also use a laser in order to achieve the exact same effect. However, they both require you to have an object that is safe for you to point your gun at a long distance. This tool allows you to do this indoors without pointing a firearm at any objects on your neighbor's property or on public property if you live in a city like I do. So make sure that you use a bore sighting tool in order to safely do this if you're going to use this indoors. I make sure that it is propped up against the wall to where when I make an adjustment with the bore sight tool, it stays in place. Remember that the scope is already leveled with the rifle, so the scope and the bore sight tool actually don't need to be level. They just need to be plumb with each other. So as long as the grid lines on the bore sight tool are plumb or parallel with the scope on the interior, then you're totally fine at this point. Now I simply remove the scope adjustment caps, and just remember that it's opposite when you use a bore sight tool. So when you're at the range and your rifle is shooting 1 inch low, you need to move it 4 clicks up in order for that bullet to hit higher on the target. However, this is the opposite when using a bore sight tool. If you notice that your sights are 1 inch low on your bore sight tool, then you must move the crosshairs 1 inch down in order for it to be on point with your bore sight. Now, this does not guarantee a accurate rifle yet. You obviously do need to zero your rifle at the range, but this will allow you to at least hit paper at roughly 50 yards. Doesn't mean you'll even hit paper at 100 yards, but you will be able to probably hit paper at 50 yards just by simply bore sighting. This will help save you a lot of ammo and a lot of time, because if you do this with multiple rifles, you don't want to have to shoot at 25, 50, and 100 yards over and over and over again. It's much easier to skip out the 25-yard range, simply go to 50, then 100, and then your rifle is sighted in. In the next video, we're going to be talking about ammo selection. We will also do a video on firearm rigidity, but honestly, I'm not the most qualified person to talk about that since I'm not a gunsmith. I will just give you a basic overview on a couple of the key things to look for when shooting a rifle and some of the key things that you can do in order to troubleshoot inaccuracy if you are coming across that in your experience. Hope you guys learned something from this video, and we'll see you guys next time.